Okay. Well, today I am so excited to welcome Louis G. Bruno to the Italian American Stories podcast. He is the author of the book, The Love of San Demetrio, which is an amazing, heartfelt book. We spoke briefly on the phone before I read the book, but after reading the book, I feel like I know you on such a personal level. So, again, welcome to the Italian American Stories podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm very happy to be here. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, it's great. And like I said, the book is, oh, it's amazing. I'm ready to read it again, and just it touched me in so many ways when I read it. So, yeah, did you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about your book and tell our listeners about it?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you. I'm so happy that you could say that after reading the book, especially with your background and experience and all the podcasts that you've done. So thank you.
Of course.
Um, yeah, I think first off, you'd mentioned your listeners might want to know where from Italy our family is originally from. So I thought I'd start with that.
Perfect.
The name of the town is called San Demetrio nei Vestini. There are at least two San Demetrios in Italy, and this little place where my family's from is not the first one to come up. So they add nei Vestini behind it. Now that is it's about a 2 hour drive northeast of Rome, and it's about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes or so from the major city near there is Aquila. So
Okay.
that's where they're from.
Yeah, I looked it up and I saw one was in, I think, Calabria.
Yes,
Okay, so there is the two different ones. Yeah.
right.
Yeah, no, thank you for telling our listeners that. They do like to know that it kind of creates that connection. So, one of the questions that I thought we'd go over is kind of talking about, it's a book that spans the continents, right? It goes from America to Italy and back and forth. But I was just wondering, like, what is the Italian experience that maybe readers could take away and or relate to it that is relevant in the book?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stephanie. So I think that many of your listeners are probably aware generally of the Italian immigration experience. There are several examples of that. Of course, recently we saw a somewhat a mostly beautiful example of that in the movie Cabrini, which came
Yes.
out earlier this year. So this is more a specific, I would say, specific family story. And the good news about it is it's a true story. I didn't have to make anything up. I just wrote from my experience and my memories and from the memories of my aunts and uncles and grandparents, which they shared with me. So that's kind of the general gist and background of the book.
Yeah, no, it definitely. I think we should maybe go over the book a little bit, kind of give an overview, kind of explain sort of your
Sure.
inspiration and not giving any spoilers away, but
No, of course, of course. So the transition is this. My grandparents came to Italy in the early 19 teens. Okay. Um, they left a small village in Italy where, of course, there were no jobs and in their mind, no future. And they took the risk to come to America and landed in the steel mill area in Western Pennsylvania, where I grew up, a small town called Midland. It's along the Ohio River, about 40 miles west of Pittsburgh. And a lot of immigrants did that. And what was fascinating to me was to think that these were people in the 19 teens that probably if you asked them to go 10 miles from San Demetrio to Aquila, they would have told you were crazy. They weren't going to go there. That's too far. Yet they traveled over 5,000 miles. And of course, we have the benefit of our cell phones and, air travel and all that. They had none of that. They had to
Oh,
get on a horse and carriage, and probably do some walking to get to possibly a train station to get them down to Naples. Then
yeah.
they had to take the risk of getting on a boat. And it wasn't a great boat like the boats we have today, right?
Yeah.
It was
Not
a
all
rough
inclusive
trip.
by any means.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's several stories out there, of course, of how it being several weeks. And my grandmother talked about that actually. So then they land, and even when they come to America, there's still a lot of uncertainty because when they land, they're not even sure they're going to be able to stay. They have to be processed at Ellis Island. So and I'll take it from there the rest of the way. Then they still don't know where they are. They're in a new country. They've got to get, again, a trolley, a train, or whatever to a train station, and then a bus or whatever to get to this tiny little town called Midland, Pennsylvania. And I think we have to reflect and look back and say, we have the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah.
Okay. We know how that turned out for them, but they partook on a journey that was full of uncertainty. We have
Yeah.
certainty, they had uncertainty, but because of the Italian families, what I call timeless virtues of love and faith and unwavering perseverance, they made it. They
Yeah.
made it. And so that we, 3 generations, 4 generations later, could kind of stand on their shoulders. And because of that, I feel like we owe them a debt of gratitude that we can't repay. So writing the book for me is kind of a down payment on that.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. And I love that idea of the hindsight, looking back, because we can look back and appreciate what they went through and then finding their little stories in between, and kind of like piecing their lives together, which is a little bit of what you did in the book.
Right, exactly. So the story, in essence, just to kind of give an overview of it, and this will take a few minutes, but I think it'll be helpful for your
Oh, well,
listeners.
absolutely.
So they come in the early 19 teens, right? By 1923, my grandmother already has 4 children and the fifth one on the way, while
Yep.
my grandfather's working in the steel mill, right? And fortunately, one of those 4 children was my dad. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking to you right now, right? So got the fourth, fifth one on the way, and my grandfather becomes ill. Now, this was a story I was always told as a kid, and bits and pieces of it was, well, he kind of had some type of kidney disease and he had some type of infection or whatever. Generally speaking, it seems that um, it was something that in today's world you would be able to survive with. Either it wouldn't be an issue
Sure.
because of antibiotics or you'd have dialysis or whatever. But in that case, the doctors in America did everything they could. And of course, in a steel town, and I grew up with this even when I was young, they open up the coke ovens in the middle of the afternoon, the sky turns orange, you know.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of smoke. So he was working a lot of overtimes. He got ill,
Hmm.
right? And they said, we really don't know what else to tell you except to get some fresh air. Well, what did he know about fresh air? All he knew about fresh air was Italy,
Yeah.
right? So here he is standing on the front porch of a duplex, and his next door neighbor happened to be his best friend, who happened to be married to his wife's sister. So it's his sister and brother-in-law and best friend, and they have no children. And he says, hey, look, I'm going to need your help. I'm leaving for Italy. My wife's got 4 children, as you know. The fifth one's on the way. Why don't you take the youngest one,
Hmm.
Rudy, who's about 15 months old, and why don't you watch him? Because I'm leaving here in August of 23. I'm probably not going to be able to be back until the spring.
Yeah.
And then this time the baby's going to be born and everything. So at that point, 2 people left 113 Midland Avenue. My grandfather and little Rudy Bruno, my
Yeah.
uncle, never to be returned. So that is kind of the start of the journey and the first generation.
Yeah. No, I love it. And then it's you and I talked earlier about how that we if we could wish we could like be a fly on the wall to hear that actual conversation, that they had on that duplex porch. It's pretty amazing.
Right, exactly. So what I do in the book, the book is written kind of in units.
Hmm.
The first unit is kind of the early years of me growing up in Midland, a small town, and you get to walk in my shoes, but also in the shoes of my aunts and uncles who were children in the early 19 teens when they lost their father because he went to Italy, never to return. And then as I looked up to them, as my aunts and uncles who I loved. And I think people will be able to relate. especially in Italian families, but in all families. Someone has a special aunt or a special uncle, or a grandmother or grandaunt or whatever that meant a lot to them as a child. And I think that people will be able to relive their childhood as they read those chapters. And then I take it from there to being a young adult.
Mhm.
And through that process, I got to re-meet a lot of my aunts and uncles and process them as adults, particularly my Uncle Rudy. Now, my Uncle Rudy was given away. He was not raised with the family, but we all knew who he was.
Mhm.
And when I started my work life, when I graduated from college, the University of Pittsburgh, and I moved to Florida, my Uncle Rudy was living in Miami, which is where I started. So I really got to develop a great bond with him and his wife, who was suffering from MS, and he who was suffering from Crohn's disease. For listeners who are unaware of that, that's kind of an intestinal disease caused by stress. Now at the time I thought, well, he's taking care of his wife that has MS, whatever, that would cause a lot of stress. I attributed it to that. Um, but those were really fun times, and I got to love my Uncle Rudy so much that very uniquely, I chose someone not in my generation to be the best man of our wedding to my dear wife Adele. So that
Yeah.
kind of brings you through the first two units, and I'll just pause there if you have any questions or comments.
Well, I think having those first two units of the book is so essential. I couldn't imagine your book without that because it builds so much background. It helps the readers understand your family, see those traditions. And without all of that, the main plot of the story is it would still be amazing, but you need all of that. And I think going back to earlier, we were talking about kind of tying that Italian American experience, and you see so much of that in those first few units. As I was reading, I would take pictures of it, like little passages, and send to my mom and be like, this sounds like our family. And,
Right.
and so, but it does build up that background that I think you need for the next couple units that come.
Yeah, and it's a neat thing that the chapters are intentionally small. They're
Hmm.
all short stories. So my idea in writing the book was this. This was the feel that I wanted to create for the reader. Assuming you're reading it before you go to bed at night. My wife does a lot of that. You read a chapter or two, and when you're finished with the chapter, you go, I really enjoyed that. You feel like you're at a stopping point. You can go to bed. You don't have to try to stay up and wonder when you're going to end. And hopefully you're thinking, you know what, I can't wait till tomorrow night or the next time I pick up the book to read the next chapter.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
actually, as I was writing the book, this is a little bit of the process. I had friends of mine. Some had written books, some were avid readers, some were just lawyers, some were punctuation experts and all that stuff. And I said, as I complete a unit, I will send it to you, and I need your honest feedback. Now, these were friends. I didn't want people saying, "Well, Lou, it sounds great,"
Yeah.
And first they said that so much at first that I was a little nervous. But when I got to the middle of the book, I had someone slam me and say, "Lou, who wrote those chapters? You lost your voice." So I had to
Nice.
rewrite some of the later chapters when I was in Rome. But it was very helpful to me to have that feedback along the way. And basically, my friends and associates were my editors, along with my dear wife, who is very, very good at that type of stuff, and she held me accountable. So I'm grateful to her. Um, but the story transitions from there to now we're at the point where these aunts and uncles that I love are getting much later in life.
Hmm.
My grandmother, who actually lived as a widow into her mid 90s, imagine that,
Mm.
living 65 years as a widow,
Yeah.
raising four children on her own, including my dad. And it was just amazing. Now, you have to look at it through an eyes of a little kid. To me, who was visiting my grandmother, obviously I didn't you don't think of those things when
No.
you're 7, 8, 9 years old. Oh, my grandmother's a widow. What a sacrifice, how difficult it is living on her own. See, you don't see those things. All you
No.
see is the cookies that she offers you, and her working in her garden and those types of things, which are fun. Um, But once my grandmother passed away, my Aunt Connie, who
Mm-hmm.
was the woman who my grandmother was pregnant with, all
Mm-hmm.
right, the only girl, she writes this wonderful, beautiful 25-page um, essay on my grandmother, who she adores, and she just looks up and calls her mother. And she talks about what it was like growing up, and how she used to take my Aunt Connie to Pittsburgh, which was about 40 miles away. So they would go on trains and trolleys to get there, and they would buy oil and flour in bulk, and she would buy grapes for wine, and she would bake when she came home, and they had boarders in the upstairs of their
Mm-hmm.
duplex that worked in the mill, and that's how she survived. Beautiful story,
Mm-hmm.
true story, wonderful story. We loved it. And then about a year later, my uncle Rudy, and now so my grandmother, my aunt's in her early 70s, my uncle Rudy's in his early 70s, and he's in ill health by this time. His wife, Nan, has already passed away from MS. And he writes this essay, which he titles The Other Side of the Coin.
Mm-hmm.
And he says basically, you guys thought you had it rough, and you thought I had it great because I was raised kind of as a single child, and I'm going to, inherit this money and get paid for college and everything. So he goes through this long treatise where he talks the financial aspects, and he talks um, the human aspects of his love that he missed from his mother growing up. And it's extremely fascinating because he has trips to Italy during that. It's just amazing. And he was an insurance executive. Okay. So he was very precise. And I talk about that a lot in the early parts of the book when I talk about visiting him, which I did
Yep.
visit him when I was a kid, and going up in his cherry tree, and how he very delicately but politely tells me that it's a delicate tree and that I shouldn't climb that tree. He could correct you with a smile on his face very well.
Yeah.
But because of his meticulousness, he writes this story. He sends it only to 5 people. He mails it to my dad and his brothers and sister. Okay, so those four, and to me. And so I get it and I read it. And of course, this is my busy time in my life, and I'm fascinated by it. And I could see the pain and the
Mm.
hurt. When my undergraduate degree in school at the University of Pittsburgh was a Bachelor of Science, a BS in psychology, which I jokingly say is mostly BS, but not all BS. And one of the things that I've really carried with me through life is the concept. And I could, some things in books you could still see the pictures of, right? I could still see the picture that people process information differently based on their background and experience. And I won't go into detail on that now, but granted to say, my Aunt Connie had a background and experience with my
Hmm.
grandmother, excuse me, and she wrote about that. And Rudy had his separate experience, and he wrote about that. So when he sent it out, again, this was a busy time for me. By this time, my wife and I are raising a family with, my wife came from a large family. She's one of seven, the only girl. She wanted a large family. We ended up with 7 children. God bless her for all the work she did in carrying
Yeah.
them all while I was out providing for the family. She had the difficult job, and she did it impeccably and still does as a grandmother. She's amazing. In any event, we've got all this going on, and I got a chance to read the stories. But meanwhile, I'm coaching softball, little league for my kids, and all that stuff. So I pick up the phone. I give Rudy a call, thinking, okay, I'm going to be the BS in psychology psychologist, and I'm going to. I have to do 2 things. One, I have to acknowledge his story.
Hmm.
Okay. And two, I have to be empathetic. And kind of third is I got to try to do this without, bringing it up and getting him all riled up again. I didn't want to,
Sure.
cause some rehurt and pain. Uh, So before I call him, I call my dad. And now my father and Rudy were very, very close. Nan, his wife, who had passed away, and my mother were very close. And they were probably the closest of all the siblings. And I asked my dad, I go, well, what did you think? And he goes, I read it and it was total BS. And I put it back in the envelope and sent it back to him. I mean, when my father said that, I was shocked
Yeah.
because I knew my father loved Rudy. And so here it was. Here's a guy that all through his life carries this. He finally, at the age of 72, gets the courage to tell his story, and he's dismissed again.
Yeah.
Just like he thought he was dismissed from his mother, he's
Hmm.
dismissed again. How painful is that?
Oh, I know.
So I make it through the phone call with him and, have the acknowledgement and everything. And right at the end of the phone call, he drops a bombshell on me. And I won't get into it now. That's for the readers, but he drops a bombshell on me about some other things. And I'm thinking, you know, I hang up the phone and I'm thinking, A, seems unlikely. It can't possibly be true. But B, I know Rudy.
Hmm.
And I have all these experiences I wrote from childhood all the way, consistent with his personality. And he's a businessman
Hmm.
that he wouldn't put things in writing that we could, in today's words, we call it fact check.
Yeah.
That if we fact checked, it would false. He wouldn't do that. But I'm busy, so I just put it over to the side. Well, then years pass, and my aunt passes away. My uncle Victor, who was the one who lived with my grandmother, he stayed single and lived with her. He passes away. Everybody's passed away by now except for my father, and it's 2006. He actually passed away the end of that year. And we, because of the fact that our daughter had a semester in Rome, my wife and I get the opportunity to go to Rome. And as I say in the book, otherwise we might still be saying someday we'll go to Rome. So we go there, and of course we have the idea of visiting all the sites, but we're also going to, visit family. So let me just summarize it there and say that the first half of the book is my life in the United States up to the age 50.
Hmm.
The second half of the book is kind of that 1 week in Italy.
Yeah.
So I'll just kind of pause there because I know that was kind of a long treatise, and then I'll launch into part of the Rome part.
No, it was great. And going back to the two letters slash essays that were written by your Aunt Connie and Uncle Rudy, I will tell you, future readers, it was so fascinating for me. I found myself flying through those sections and going back and trying to like compare and like find pieces of the two letters because like you said, or like Rudy said, the opposite side of the coin. And so just having those two versions, it was fascinating to read. And then it starts building up to I guess you could say the I don't want to say mystery, but in a way, mystery that comes in the second half of the book um, when you land in Italy, you know.
Yes, exactly. And that does set up the mystery. And part of it is, who's when you get into certain versions, and I say that I heard from my family the history, including my aunt and uncle who put it in writing, but the history um, mostly complemented each other, and sometimes competed.
Hmm.
Everybody's got a different story, different way of selling, and then sometimes contradicted.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting. So I had that in the back of my mind, and so then we go to Italy, and here's my expectations going to Italy. One is my wife and I are going to get to Rome for the first time, and we're going to get to see our daughter there. And by that time, she'd already been there, so she knew she'd been there for a month or so she knew the sights of Rome. So we had an excellent guide. She was in class, so she couldn't visit the sacred sites with us, but going to the Vatican, the Sistine Chapel, the Colosseum, and there's many other hidden gems, I call them, that are in Rome. And I'll just give you one example. If you go to the Colosseum, which who's not going to go to the Colosseum when they're in Rome, right?
Right.
Very close to the Colosseum is a place called the Mamertine Prison.
Mm.
Almost no one goes there. It was empty when we were there in 2006. Well, that's the prison that Peter and Paul were in when they were in chains. Okay. And then there is a church just above the Colosseum called St. Peter in Chains. And most people that are aware of it do it for an art reason because Michelangelo's Moses is there, which is
Yeah.
a spectacular sculpture, of course. But also underneath the altar are the chains that Peter and Paul were chained to when they were
Mm.
in prison. So these were some of the things that I was seeing, which were also, and these were a lot of the chapters that I had to rewrite because I had to kind of personalize them. I started writing and it was, we went here and we went there and we went here and we went there and people just went blah, blah, throw that out. That's no good. And I said, I knew it when I sent it, but doggone it, I have to rewrite it. And that took me a long time. But what I did find is I found ways to personalize it and for example, things that we would see in various churches that were things I was taught
Mm.
of way back in grade school and can
Yeah.
relate to, I related to that. So readers should be assured when they're reading the early chapters and they feel like, geez, I'd like to race and get to the punchline. You don't have to do that. Just kind of
Mm.
enjoy the early chapters because none of that goes to waste. It's all part of the story, as you said, but
Mm.
there are also links. There are many, many, many links of my experiences and how when I got to Rome, because of those experiences, it all meant so much more to me. So then we meet my father's cousin. His name is Ottorino, and they were cousins by virtue of the fact that Ottorino's father and my dad's father, my grandfather who died, were brothers.
Yeah.
Okay. So he takes us to the cemetery, and you talked about going into cemeteries. We kind of had a fun conversation about that.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, that's not my thing.
And
Okay.
I
I like to do it quickly, but there were some
love
funny things that
it.
happened in the mausoleum where my grandmother and my Uncle Vic and my grandparents and readers will have to read that in the book, and that kind of softened me on it. But the thing that was neat to me was first place Otorino takes us is to the cemetery. And I knew that I was going to see where my grandfather was buried because I had an older sister that had been there and I'd seen pictures of his picture on a mausoleum, which unbelievably 100 years later was preserved in a great looking picture. Um, and I start walking up towards that and I'm looking and I'm seeing all these names on the tombstones, DiMaggio, Ulizio, De Prospero, um, etc. And these were all the last names of the kids that I played and swam with and played ball with in Midland. So I I, I call it, a walk in San Demetrio, a walk down Midland Avenue. So um, every one of those experiences that day, and there were several more as we went to the Bruno family home, which to my surprise, I knew that the Bruno family had a home and I knew it was there for a long time. It turned out it was Otorino's father,
Mm.
whose name was Antonio. It was his, and he was the one that took care of my grandfather when he came back to Italy.
Hmm.
My grandfather lived from like August of 23 till he died in the winter of 24.
Hmm.
But I didn't realize all the things that I was going to find when I got in that house. And I don't want to, disclose those for the reader, but it was very mind-boggling and very emotional for me to see all those things. And then finally, he takes me to what he called the Bruno family land, which is the land that my grandfather and his brothers owned. Um, and he very innocently tells us a story, not knowing what I knew from the first 50 years. He tells me a story about the land. And when he tells me that story, I look over at my wife like, did we just hear what we heard? And she's already crying. And I start crying. And it's like, oh my goodness, now we understand all the pieces that we were told all these years. And I look over to the left, and what I'm looking at down the hill is the cemetery, which I must say, in Italy, from our experience, the cemeteries, they're built like almost little small towns. It was built
Yeah.
on a small hill below the big hill that we were in. And that's the cover of the book,
Hmm.
The Love of San Demetrio. So that is kind of the story, and the readers get to, read that, get to read my reaction to, my wife's reaction to, and then, where the book came is, here my wife and I are, um, the week is over. We're on a plane, sitting back and thinking, okay, we've got one daughter here, our oldest in Italy. We're going back to the six that are in America. We got a full life to live. As soon as we get back, it's going to be go, go, go. How do we ever explain our experience in Italy?
Yeah.
So that was when my wife said, "You've got to write a book." And I go, "Oh, yeah, I was thinking that. I definitely have to write a book. But when?" Well, see, that would have to wait from 2006, 15 years to 2021 because I was working full time. Didn't
Yeah.
have time to do it. And the other thing she said, so that wasn't too scary, but the thing she said that scared me was, and you know what? All of our kids have to get the San Demetrio. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. Our oldest is here. She's in college. The other ones haven't started college yet. The first three are kind of close. So we're going to have three in college at the same time. And then I've got five daughters. So we have five daughters. So there's going to be weddings, right? How's this ever going to happen? But, my wife is, she's always right on the big things. God bless her. And she helps me be a better person in so many ways. So I, um, I said yes. Okay. Dad, and sometimes it's important to say yes to something before you know how you're going to do it. That's kind of a leap of faith, and that's what this was. And
Yeah.
miraculously, those things fell into place. So what I do is I take you to the end of the book, but then there's kind of an epilogue,
Hmm.
which sometimes I think an epilogue is just, okay, well, it's, this kind of happened afterwards. So what? But this was very meaningful to me because where I got to know O Torino very well. And the one thing that I didn't mention, which is another time that I burst into tears, it was when we first landed in Rome. I'm looking for O Torino. My wife and I are in customs and, presenting our passports and whatever. And I kind of have an idea what he looks like. 'Cause I've got pictures, but never seen him in person. And I see this guy walking back and forth. And when he turns to the left, he looks like Victor. When he turns to the right, he looks like Rudy. So here's the two uncles that I love the most that I've lost. And he's
Yeah.
alive. And I'm seeing him. And his personality was so much like them. So that's why I spent a lot of time talking about him, and you get to see the trips we made back. And it was at those times that I was able to document a lot of the stuff for the book.
Hmm.
So if this ever becomes a movie, which is my dream,
Oh,
I would
yeah.
have some very neat outtakes at the end of the movie while the credits are running, where you actually see O Torino and
Oh,
you
yeah.
actually see the kitchen in the house and the downstairs and the cemetery and things like that. So you got a dream, right? So
Right.
I've had so many
Absolutely.
readers say, this ought to be a movie. And that's the way I thought of it as first. I thought of it as scenes of a movie. And that's why it started with when I sat down to write it, I never thought I was going to be in the book. I never did. I
Hmm.
thought, okay, so I've got my aunt's story, I got my uncle's story, I know the punchline, I got all this stuff in Italy, I got the memories, got notes I made off and on over 15 years. This shouldn't be too hard. Well, it was difficult. And the and I got to the point and I thought, well, why was this so surprising and amazing? And it's well, because of this was my understanding at this phase of my life. This was here, this was there. And I thought, oh my goodness, I don't want to be in the book. I have to be in the book. And then once I got over the hurdle that I had to be in the book, so I wrote the first chapter with me in the book and I sent it out waiting to kind of get hit over the head. Like, what is this? You've told me this story, but why am I reading this? Everybody that I told the story to said, that's great.
Hmm.
You're on target. And I thought, oh my goodness, I am. That means I really have to do what I didn't want to do. I have to be in the book. So that's how I take you through my experience in the book. And That's how I wrote it. So you got half the book, 50 years in the US, the other half of the book, Italy, and the follow-up trips to Italy. And I also, as I was writing the book, learned a lot. I found that my sister, she goes, "Oh, by the way, I have these letters that I found."
Mm-hmm.
And we still didn't know for sure how she got them, but they must have come from my grandmother to my Uncle Victor, probably went to my dad. Then my dad passed away. They went to my sister. And there were letters
Yeah.
written by my grandfather to my grandmother during that period from August of 23 to when he died in winter of 24. uh, Letters of love, letters of reassurance, and they're absolutely incredible.
Yeah, they
Uh,
are. They're beautiful.
yeah. So that was great. So there's a lot after there, and I know. Thank you for being so patient. I
Oh,
talked for a long time there, but I'll pause for a moment for any other comments, and then we could kind of move on to the next thing.
no, I'm glad that you set all of that up because it's intriguing, you know, and it'll draw people in. And going back to you being in the story, it kind of goes back to that first 50 years, so the first two units. Without you, I kind of looked at you as like an anchor in the story a little bit, and things were just revolving around you. And there's these beautiful stories in the book that revolve around you and your young family and how your family rallied around all of you.
Right.
That if I think I said this to you yesterday, if that was not in there, I can't imagine the book without that. And so with you being kind of that anchor in the story, you see so much of that family and that love, and you're able to talk about food and all of that. And so like it was beautiful having you kind of in there as well.
Yeah, and I think, it's very easy to roll off the tongue. The Italian family has timeless virtues of love, faith, and perseverance. Um, I say that now when I'm speaking with people like you, but the book says that
Mm-hmm.
without using those words,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right? Um, and we see, we see what it took. We see
Mm-hmm.
what it took for them to do that. And the first generation, I mean, they barely went to grade school.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when my cousin, he's a second cousin, right, who lives in San Demetrio, and he's about my age, a little bit younger. When I sent the letters to him to translate, he said, "Oh my goodness," he goes, "I'll send you three things. This is what they wrote. This is what I think they were really trying to say, uh, because they were writing in, first of all, a language. Even the English language evolves over 100 years.
Sure.
Language 100 years ago, different dialects, but also, um, and I don't mean this to be offensive at all, but they didn't have the opportunity to be educated, so they weren't
Yeah.
educated, and they didn't write the letter like like we get on a typed piece of paper. Boom, 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 boom. It was like paper was scarce.
Sure.
They wrote in different angles, and in some letters, um, two or three relatives wrote a note in it.
Yeah.
So he kind of said, "This is what they wrote, and this is what." So they did that. My father um, and his brothers barely made it through high school
Hmm.
because when they got old enough to work in the mill, even when they were in high school, they worked in the mill to support the family.
Yeah.
And that was part of their story. And then, of course, my parents um, and my cousin's parents, their goal was to get us to college.
Mhm.
So they
Yeah.
sacrificed to get us to college. And then our goal was to get our kids to college. And then some of them on their own took that and have gone to graduate degrees. And I say, we're standing on their shoulders, and that's the
Hmm.
debt of gratitude uh, that we owe. And it's kind of
Absolutely.
a continuous timeline. So that's part of giving back. So I have donated several copies of my books to Italian heritage museums, and have worked with professors of Italian studies at universities, and have shared the book. And I've got a presentation where I share parts of the story to them. And we all enjoy it. It reminds them of their story and gets them thinking about that. So that's why the book is kind of a springboard. And I'm happy it's not just about me or my family. It's about uh, the American immigrant experience. Italian mostly, but I think there are a lot of immigrant family experiences that can relate to the same. So it's a very,
Absolutely.
very sweet story.
I also love how when you talk about when you're back in Italy, it's almost like, it's that full circle in a way, and you're able to walk through the fields or the cemetery or the home that so many of your ancestors have walked through. And like, what a powerful feeling that must have been, to go through that and to see where all of that started and
Right.
the life that they lived.
And there were extra things that O Torino had in store for me that I had no idea that I was going to do. I mean, I got to stand on the steps of the house where my grandmother was born.
Yeah.
It was her and a grand aunt and a grand uncle I was very, very close to. And I got to see where they lived and how they lived. And a lot of the things that they did in Midland with their homes, like terrace gardens on a hill. Why would you do that? It seems like it'd be simpler if you did it on flat land. Well, that's the way the gardens are over there. Okay.
Yeah.
But a lot of those things, really, really made a lot of sense to me once
Yeah,
I
you
went to
saw those
Italy.
connections.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then in 2023, you went back to Italy.
Right. So that was the last. So there was a trip. First went in '06,
Yeah, there was a lot
and
between.
then in '09, and then in 17 and 19, and then finally in 23, our son and his wife, they had gotten married the year before. They said, we're going to go to Italy for our anniversary. So, and this happened multiple times. You think, okay, you make this decision, we're going to go to Italy. How are we going to get them all there? Well, many of the times that we went, it was because our kids, one way or another, were already going there,
They
uh,
initiated it.
mostly on their dime. Okay, like one of our daughters won a trip from her company,
Oh,
and their trip
wow.
was in Rome, so she was already there, and she brought another one of our daughters because they could bring a guest. So
Yeah.
anyway, our and this was um, so August of 23 was when I sent the book to the publisher. And then in September was when we went. And I'm like, come on, you got to get me printed copies. You got to get me printed copies before this date, because my cousin, who is the one that translated the letters, who lives in San Demetrio and has a modern home on a portion of the Bruno family's land, um, he said, I'm really close with the mayor. I'll set up a meeting with you and the mayor of San Demetrio. So it was really neat. I got to present my book to the mayor of San Demetrio. That was very, very special and moving.
Oh, yeah. That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're working on getting the book translated into Italian as well, right?
Yes. Yes, I am. So I did as much as I could. I know enough Italian to be dangerous, and I've learned a lot of things. Again, I learned a lot of things that I think after I learned them, that should have been obvious. I should have known that. But I didn't realize that what I'm about to tell you is a thing until I started talking to Italian professors and other people and talking about my book. And that is this: when I was raised, um, my parents spoke fluent Italian, but they did not speak Italian around the house.
Yeah.
My grandparents, of course, spoke fluent Italian. That was their native language.
Yeah.
um, they did not speak Italian. They spoke broken English, which as a kid, I talk about how I made fun of, and I have a PhD in broken English. That could be a whole nother podcast. It'd be fun, you know, don't you monkey around and that type of things. And, um, but they purposely did not teach my generation Italian because they wanted to Americanize us.
Yep.
So, good news, bad news. I didn't know that much Italian. I took some Italian in college, and I had taken Spanish, and they're kind of close. So I know enough to be dangerous. And of course, living in Florida, Spanish language is fluent and spoken
Yeah.
to a lot. And we have daughters who are had married to men with Hispanic heritages. So, we were familiar with the Spanish language, but I knew enough to be dangerous. So I had to send it to my cousins in Italy, who are all professionals in various fields. And fortunately, they made sure that what I did was good. And then I also sent it to some professors here to double check. And I just got an idea from one of the professors, because Um, I, some of your strengths
Yeah,
exercised to an extreme can become false.
sure,
So
absolutely.
I can be a perfectionist, right? So I'm still thinking like I don't really 100% know, and I'm looking at it right here. I've got the stack of it here. I don't 100% know if it's exactly it. So she said, "Why don't you write a disclaimer?"
Hmm.
So I wrote a sweet little disclaimer in the front of the book that basically says, "Look, I did my best to translate this into the beautiful Italian language, but no book is perfect. Mine's
Yeah.
not, and no translation is perfect. So if by chance you come across this in Italian and you look at it and you go, boy, that was awkward. That looks like some instructions I got from IKEA. That, that's no good. Just substitute a thought of love in there and get by that little rough
A
spot,
little bit of grace.
and we'll all be okay. So
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
it will be in Italian.
Going back to, I want to go back really quick to Italy when you went back in 2023 with the mayor. I mean, I just think of your ancestors, like what a proud moment for them. I mean, you have gone back to that home, and the mayor is talking to you about a book about your family and presenting it. It's just, that's an amazing
Yeah.
thought to think of.
Yeah, it really was. And it reminds me of some coincidences of the book that I said I would share with you. And um, there are at least three, since I mean there are many more, but um, one is San Demetrio,
Hmm.
the name of the town. My grandfather's name is Demetrio.
Hmm.
Okay. But so as I'm writing the book, I've got it. It's February of 23, and I've got it to a point where I could send the transcript. I've had my friends reading it. Now I could send it to a woman that I met through another author that has edited many books. And I didn't want her to change anything. I said, just give me suggestions. I'll do the editing, but just give me suggestions. And she said, okay, I'll do that. Here's the price. It's fair, not a big deal. And we're talking in January, and she said, when are you going to get it to me? And I said, well, sometime this year. She goes, no, not sometime this year, February 15th. She knew you have to give an author a deadline
Yeah.
because if you don't,
No.
I would still be writing The Love of San Demetrio.
Yeah.
All right. So she gives me this deadline. Here it is, February 14th, Valentine's Day, the day of love, right? And my wife and I had celebrated, and it was in the evening, and she's doing her few things that she does in her little art office before she goes to bed, and I'm doing my thing. And I finally get ready and go, okay, I'm going to hit send. And all of a sudden I get cold feet. I think to myself, wait a minute. Up to this point, everybody that knew me, knew the family, or knew the story, people I felt I could trust, knew this. But now, not only is someone outside the family going to know this, but if I go through with this, the world's going to know. What would Rudy think? What would they think? Can I really do this? Well, of course, obviously, I got over that fear.
Yeah.
I hit send, and I lean back in my chair, and I pick up my cell phone, which we all do too much. All
Yeah.
right. But at the end of the day, I look and I get an email, which is memories of the day.
Hmm.
Many of us get those memories of the
Yeah.
day. I get them about 5 days a week, and neat little things that I send to my kids or whatever. And I look at it, and the memories of the day, three pictures. My grandmother with her hand up in the air,
Hmm.
um, Rudy in a picture with Vic and my grandmother and my Aunt Connie, and they're all smiling. And then another picture of them, and I think I'm going to take that as a sign that this is okay.
Absolutely. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And then the other coincidence was another time when I was about to hit send. Through the course of this, I told you about my sister's letters that she sent to me. Um, and then later, I was at her house. She lives in California. And I was looking through her kind of picture memory box for stuff. She goes, oh, yeah, that's where the letters came from. And I look in there, and there's this little postcard in there. It was a postcard that my grandfather sent to my grandmother. He sends it from Boston when he's
Yeah.
about to get on a plane, right, on a boat to go back to Italy. He sends it to her. And it dawns on me that about 100 years to the date that he sent that postcard back to my grandmother, is when the book was being published.
Oh my gosh.
100 years and 4 generations for it to come full circle.
Yeah.
So the book gets published. We go to Italy and back, and then my wife says, we have to have kind of a little book signing. So we decided to do that in a little local independent bookstore. And of course, it's all friends. It's not like I have an audience of fans that are going to come. They're all friends, which is great. It was a great little gathering, and my son's wife, my daughter-in-law, who had just gone on that trip. Of course, they met the mayor of San Demetrio, and they're on Facebook and they're following him and everything. We're walking in the door to do this. This is in October of 23. And she says, "You've got to look at my phone." And I'm like, "I'm busy." And I'm thinking, "Are you sure?" And she goes, "Yeah, you got to look at this." The mayor of San Demetrio had a post that said, the day that we were having the signing of the book was the feast of Saint Demetrio.
Mm, that's amazing.
So are they three coincidences, or was this just something that was meant to be?
A little bit of fate. We were talking earlier, and I guess it didn't dawn on me. Well, you said there's like a lot of little coincidences in there. Even you moving to Miami with Rudy. I mean,
Right,
like that's a huge one because
right.
that creates your guys' bond and relationship, or builds it up even more. So that's a huge one.
Absolutely. And what I do in the book, and I wrestled with this because I thought, is this overkill or not? And then I thought, well, there's two different types of people that watch a mystery. Not that this is all just about a mystery. There's that's part of the story. But
Yeah.
when I watch a mystery, at the end, I'm like totally amazed. Okay. And I'm sitting there with my dear wife watching it, and she goes, well, didn't you didn't you see this? And didn't you see that? Didn't you see that? And she takes you there and it's like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And of course now you can rewatch the movie and see those things, which
Yeah.
that's one of the feedbacks that I get about my book from people I think that are a lot like me. They go, now that I read it, I want to go back and read it over again and you know, see this develop. Um, but anyway, because of that, I wrote at the end of the book, I kind of recap all, not everything, but all the major pieces of the puzzle
Hmm.
that had to come together for this story to work,
Yeah.
including pieces of the puzzle that I didn't think about until later. And this one isn't in the book, but I met Otorino in 2006 and got to see him again in 2009. Consummate businessman. He was the vice president of sales of Varig Airlines in Brazil. He was part of the Italians that some came to America,
Hmm.
but others went to Brazil,
Yeah.
Argentina. So he went there, very, very articulate businessman. And then there was a gap from 2009 to 2017. And during that time, he went from his early 80s to his late 80s, and he developed Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
So this is the most brilliant, one of the most brilliant people that I've ever met.
Yeah.
Um, and he wasn't there.
Hmm.
So you think about it, had I not gone in 2006 and then been able to document things in 2009, we wouldn't have the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I mean, and that's a short span of time when you think of it overall.
So I'd say for people who feel like, I probably should write my story, but I haven't gotten around to it, or you have memories of what you've been told, um, start small. Don't think I have
Yeah,
to write a book. Okay. Just write down some of the memories, some of your reflections on that, because there are people that will appreciate that. If it ends
absolutely.
up being a book, great. This was not to me about writing a book. It was paying back the debt, and also specifically for my uncle Rudy, who I dearly loved, and this book is dedicated to anyone who ever longed for the assurance that their parents love them.
Yep.
And I don't I don't feel like in the book I lead the witness. I mean, Connie's got her story,
Hmm.
beautiful, stands alone. Rudy's got his story. You know, those are what's.
Yeah.
That's what happened, people's view of what happened. And I think when you get into things that are what, you're just sharing facts
Yeah.
presented as people know them. When you start getting into why,
Hmm.
um, that's what causes judgment, and that's where people get into, if you go too far down that, it's okay to go a little bit, say why, but you go too far down, you start saying, well, this must be what she was thinking, and she did that for her benefit or whatever. That's what it gets into judgmental.
Sure.
Now you're trying to project why they were thinking that. I stay away from all that. It's like, this is my grandmother, this is my aunt, this is my uncle, this is what they thought, this is what I thought. And I think generally speaking, it's about love, and why can't, in their own way, they all be right?
Absolutely. And I
We
think I
don't
think
have
they
to make a
are.
decision
Yeah.
on that to enjoy the story. And I think that's a lesson for life too, is appreciating other people's stories and just letting them be told.
Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
since the book is dedicated to Rudy, your Uncle Rudy, if you could speak to him today, what would you like to tell him about the book?
Well, I thought about that, and the first thing that I thought of was I'm more interested in what he would tell me,
Mm.
and I can almost see that I would be the little boy in that cherry tree that he's politely trying to tell shouldn't be in the tree, and he would, with a smile on his face and a twinkle in his eye, um, be telling me, "Yeah, you wrote this, but you missed this," or whatever. His perfectionist. If I'm a perfectionist, he was a super perfectionist. Um, but hopefully, it would end with a glorious hug of appreciation that he no longer had to carry the story on his own, that he was truly believed, is what I would tell him, and
Mm,
that there's a lot of compassion and love for him.
that's
Yeah.
beautiful. I love
So,
it. All right. So, what projects do you have coming up next? Any new
well,
ones?
Well, the biggest project that I have in retirement with my dear wife is enjoying our kids and our grandkids. So that's number one. And then I have a lot of volunteer work that I do that's in there. And the third is this hobby of writing. So I had an idea for several books I was going to write. I didn't realize how deeply I would get into the Love of San Demetrio. Um, and the Italian version. So working on that, that will be available soon. Many people have said that that love to see the movie. I always
Mm.
thought of it as a movie first, which is really how I started writing. I started writing it as scenes from a movie. That's what got me over my initial writer's block. So I never wrote a book before, and I did that. So somehow I'm going to try to write a screenplay, um, because I've been told that that's something that you should do. Of course, there's a once in a gazillion chance that this would ever be a movie, but if it ever was, I would like someone who actually professionally wrote the manuscript to at least know how I saw it and what I thought.
Absolutely.
So I'm having fun playing around with that. That's going to be, I think that's going to be some pretty heavy lifting.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I'm doing is, as part of giving back, I've offered to donate my book to Italian Heritage Societies, who said, "Oh, we'd love to come you to speak," or "We have a book club. We'd love to use your book as part of our book club, and then you could speak, and either in person or via Zoom or whatever." So I've got a lot of that, places that I want to travel, people that have gotten back to me in Philadelphia and New York and Chicago and San Diego and San Francisco, and places I want to visit. My wife and I want to go and have a little bit of fun. I've heard a Little Italy in San Diego is big Italy there. It's
Oh,
pretty incredible. I
cool.
never knew how nice it was, but our daughter had the opportunity to go there and she raved about it. So that'll be part of it. Again, just having fun. And then I wrote a book that I actually finished the words for before this book. Um, it's called The Days When Ella Came Down the Stairs. It's a story about a time for 4 years where one of our granddaughters, Ella, and her mom lived with us before my daughter got remarried and they moved out of the house. And it was all the funny things that she said and did. It was absolutely hilarious. And I sat down and I was able to put them to rhyme. And I thought, wow, this is a really neat story. And then I gave it to my daughter and her husband as a gift when they moved, when
Mm.
my daughter remarried and my daughter moved out of the house with Ella. And then I thought, well, I want it illustrated. And then my wife has got a lot of artistic talent in her
Mm.
family. She's extremely talented. She was a commercial artist for an advertising agency when we were first married before we started having children. And she's just got tons of talent, and her mother as well, and her aunts and uncles and stuff like that, just incredible. So I said, I want you to be the illustrator of the book.
Mm.
So, she had cancer in between and she had an accident and broke her arm in between. So it's taken a while, but we're finally at the point where we're like this close to it'll be published, the
Oh,
days when Ella came down the stairs. And that'll be really cute. And again,
yeah.
the takeoff on that is it's not just about our memories, but I'll have pages in the back of the book that say, Ella said this funny thing, but the grandparent reading their grandchild, remember, you said this funny thing, and they'll say, well, Grandpa, you did this. So they can write their memories down too. And then
Oh,
in
that's
that way,
cool.
the book becomes their book and it's fun. So the days when Ella came down the stairs, and hopefully it'll be out soon.
Oh, that's a great. I love how you added those pages at the end. That's
Yeah,
really neat. Like what a nice family heirloom. I can see that being given like at Christmas or birthdays and
right.
oh, that's really cool.
I got some resistance to that. There were some people, I won't say who, that didn't think I should put that in the back, but I go, no, I think it'll fly.
I love it. I think it's a great idea. Absolutely. It can just be
And
passed down.
I could see myself donating copies of that book to like Alzheimer organizations and
Mm,
things like that.
yeah,
You
absolutely.
Um, so
Oh, I love it. I think it's a great
fun.
idea. How cute. And then all the families involved. You're writing, your wife is drawing, and it's your granddaughter's stories.
Yeah, and Ella is so dear because she's going to be 11 now.
Mm.
And she saw my wife working on the illustrations, and she goes, Grandma, when you guys finish this book, she goes, a lot of my friends are probably going to have to buy this book because I'm going to have to sign a lot of them. So she's practicing her signature
Oh,
skills. She's
perfect. Yep.
excited.
That's
And
true.
if it
That's
all
so
works
cute.
out, I ran this idea by her. I said, listen, if you don't think you can do it, that's fine. But I think at the little book signing, which would be cute to do, it's a short book. It's not like my book, 200 some pages, 32 pages, which is a standard children's book. I said, I want to read the story.
Hmm.
But when
Mm.
it comes to things you said, I want you to read your part.
Oh,
So
cute.
she liked that idea. She goes, I'm not sure I could do that. Maybe I'll be nervous. I go, how about this? You're not under any obligation. If you feel nervous that day and you can't do it, I'll read it. But otherwise, we'll plan for it. We'll practice it. So
Oh,
I,
that'd be so adorable.
I
I
just think
love
it'll be cute.
it.
Her as an 11-year-old using words that she said from 3 to 1. And now, we have other grandkids that are in that age group now, like from 5 to 1. And people in the family still use a lot of the words and phrases that she said,
Oh,
and
so cute.
it's kind of our own little language. We kind of know
Right?
what it means and we have fun with it.
Yep.
So,
Yep. That you get to share with the world now. That's pretty cool. Well, where can people find you, find your book, buy your book?
well, thank you for asking. So the publisher is Sea Hill Press, which is very, very close to here in a small town called Leesburg, Florida, very close to Orlando. I love the publisher because he's very patient with me and works with us and allowed me to have, I had the contract written. I wanted final editing because a lot of publishers don't allow that. They go, you give it to us, we'll do the final editing. I did not want that. I wanted it to be truly my words, and they are. And then just a lot of other things he's flexible with. And I like working with someone who's local and independent. So
Yeah.
he has the rights to the book now to print it. And he's doing that. So my wife helped me put together a little website. She had an artist website. So she helped me put together. It's by loubruno.com. So you can go on byloubruno.com and then click on the button for the book, and CO Press comes up and you can order the book that way. If
Awesome.
you're not tech savvy, once you get to that point and you're ordering the book, you don't want to do that. CO Press's phone numbers in there. You can call them up, and Greg at CO Press will be happy to help you.
Okay,
That's
perfect.
where it stands for now. I think once I transition to the Italian version, we've kind of all discussed it. And for that to be available in Italy, the idea of finding a printer in Italy, it's a big hassle. So I will probably transition to it being on Amazon then, both the English and Italian version,
Okay.
uh, and the English version of that book. But that'll probably be later in the summer. So for people listening to this immediately, you want to go to chillpress.com or byloubruno.com. If you're listening to it months from now, we're taping this in June of 25. You could probably still go to buylubruno.com, but at that point, it'll be on Amazon.
Okay, perfect. And I'll put that in the show notes for everybody so that they can
Okay.
head to your website, buy your book, read more about you, and yeah, definitely get that book. It's beautiful. It'll touch your soul and your heart. So
Well, great.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on and telling our listeners all about your beautiful book and sharing your stories with us. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for you too, Stephanie, for having me on Italian American Stories, and I wish you all the best. I really appreciate your work, and looking forward to hearing some of the future guests that you have and some of the future stories that you have on your show. So thanks for all you do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right.
All right. Bye.
Bye.